I grew up in church. I grew up going to Bible camp and believing in God. In a lot of my 20s, I really had kind of stepped away from church, and I still believed in God, but I wouldn't tell people that I was a Christian because I wanted to live for the world, and I didn't want to be judged because of that. And as I got a little bit older, I started coming back to church, and I started coming here about a year ago. And I came to church, and I did worship, and I listened to the message, and I still felt that there was something missing. And so one Sunday in June, Pastor Ross prayed like he always does, and he prayed the salvation prayer, and I really just felt God calling me to raise my hand. I had been a Christian, I had given my life to Christ, but I still felt that God was just speaking to me, and so I raised my hand, and I just recommitted my life to Christ at that moment. I didn't know that 2 weeks later, I would be fighting for my life in a bed in the ICU, but I was. In July, I began having trouble breathing, and I didn't think very much of it. It was hot. I thought maybe I was dehydrated, so I let it go for a couple of days and finally called my doctor's office and asked them what I should do, and they said, well, it's probably dehydration, so don't worry about it. Drink lots of fluids. If you're still not feeling well, tomorrow, then come back, call us back and we'll get you in. And so I went to work, and I worked an 8-hour day, and I went to my doctor's office that night, and they listened to my lungs, and they thought that they sounded fine. But thankfully, the doctor said, let's be on the safe side, and we'll send you to the emergency room. So they sent me over. They ultrasounded my legs and found that I had a massive clot in my left leg. And at that point, they said, well, we're going to send you for a CT now. We want to check to make sure it hasn't moved anywhere else. So they sent me back for the CT and found a massive clot in my left lung. And at that point, they said, we can't treat you here. We're going to have to send you to Grand Rapids. So they sent me by ambulance. When I got to Grand Rapids, they found that I actually had a clot in both of my lungs. The one in my left lung, the doctor said there was no medical explanation as to why I was not dead yet. They couldn't understand how I had been walking, how I had been talking, how I had been working. So they tried to treat it with typical therapy, which is a catheter in your lung filled with medicine that would break the clots. After 5 hours, though, it sent me into heart failure, and I started to bleed out. So the doctors rushed me back and did emergency open heart surgery. And they told my mom, very frankly, there is a very good possibility that she won't come back out of the operating room. We don't know why she's still alive now, so we're going to do our best, but we can't give you any guarantees. So my mom sat in the hospital. Her pastor came and prayed with her. At that point, people from all over the world were praying. They had started prayer chains with all of the missionaries. My friends were praying, and that got me through surgery. But through it all, every single step of the way, when a prayer was sent out, God answered that prayer in the perfect time. I made it through the surgery, so that prayer was answered. The doctor said if they took me off of the life support, they probably wouldn't be able to put me back on. So the prayer was that I needed to be able to live without the life support. They took me off, and I lived. So then the next hurdle was getting me off of a ventilator. And the very last try, I passed the ventilator test. And when I left the hospital after a month, I was still on dialysis, and so the prayer became, let my kidneys start to work again, because the doctors weren't sure. They said it could be permanent, it could be temporary, they didn't know. The day after I left the hospital, my kidneys started working. I don't know why I raised my hand in church that day. I don't know what called me to do it. I know God called me to do it. And I think for that purpose that he knew what I was going to be going through. There are so many things that happen where you wonder, was that God? I don't have to wonder, was that God? I know that God's hand touched me that entire time, that without him and without his grace, I would not be here today.